Jody is here today because she has a story to tell, because she has unfinished business, because there's more that could be done and should be done. She wants this 30-year-old cold case to gain traction and hopefully get some kind of justice for the murdered woman of this story and her family. In 1968, when Jody was 4 years old, she witnessed her father and another man rape and murder a woman in a motel room and discard her body like trash. Over the years, Jody has pieced together the memories and facts of this story to bring forth justice and healing. Today, part 1, we're going to explore the day of the murder, the timeline, the details, and the facts of the case. Let's set the scene, Jody. Tell us a bit about your life leading up to the day of the murder.
I had a brother and 2 sisters. My dad was 29 years old, and I think that made my mom 27. We lived in a dinky little house together. My dad didn't work a lot in those days, and my mom worked full time, which gave him kind of free reign of the house. His best friend, Craig, who his surname is really Donald, I learned later, but we called him Craig. He was around always in those times, and Dad would drink from the time he got out of bed until his legs betrayed him in the evening and went down. There was a lot of abuse in our house. He was very physically violent with my mother, and he was sexually abusive with all of us kids. It was kind of like a child gangbang scene with him and Craig, and that was our days.
What was the town like? What was the
town was tiny. The population at that time, I think the entirety of Clark County was about 37,000 people. Today it's 800,000, so it was a very different place. It was a sleepy little town, quite honestly.
Yeah, wow. So you went over a little bit about some family background, a history of violence. You have memories of your father partying, drinking a lot. So his character it made sense for what happened on the day of the murder.
Right, he'd stay out a lot. I can remember nights where he and Craig would be gone, and he'd crawl through the window in the middle of the night because for some reason he wouldn't have a key. Like, it was just always chaos in the house. And I remember Mom screaming and Dad coming through the window and getting something in the middle of the night and leaving. Like, he was just a creature of weirdness. Like, there was nothing ever the same in our house. Every time they fought constantly all the time, and so it was just chaos all the time. So Dad was coming and going all the time. Mom went to work regularly, but it wasn't uncommon for him to be out all night, or
So speaking of fights, what was your very first memory of this day?
So my first memory is when I'm in the car, a blue car that has black seats and there's 4 doors. Later I write to my uncle and I learned that my parents had gotten in a fight that day. And so my dad in the morning had come home and gotten in a fight and took me with him. My mom probably made him. I don't really know. The first memory I have is being in the car and we're driving down the highway.
And it was not uncommon that your dad would sometimes take you or have you...
honestly, we didn't go with my dad very much. It was out of the ordinary. Yeah, I didn't drive around with Dad. Dad did his own thing, unless he was, fucking around with us at home. We didn't go with him. I remember the only other time I remember being alone with him is when I got a rock in the head, and he took me to the hospital, and we were alone then. But most of the time, you didn't go with Dad anywhere. You just stayed at home and waited for him.
Okay. So you're in a car. Is it your car? Do you...
Well, I learned later, I don't know whose car these are at first, but obviously, and we'll talk about that more tomorrow, but the car that we're in is a big blue, I learned later it's an Oldsmobile. All I remember is that it was blue with black interior. It was a big car, so I remember looking over at Dad in the day. It was really sunny out, and he was smoking a cigarette, but he was preoccupied, and I always watched my dad a lot because he was a scary man, and I just remember... kind of being nervous driving down the road what was going on, because you could tell he was agitated, and that was never a good thing.
Okay. So you're traveling in the car together. You are headed where?
Well, I didn't know, but just a little bit down the road. I-5 is right here, but we lived in the Heights, and so we turned very quickly. We were only a car a few minutes. Like, by the time I even figure out, like even think. I barely think about anything, and we're turning into this Riverside Motel.
Okay, were you familiar with the hotel?
No, I'd never been there before.
Okay. So you arrive at the hotel, you park. Can you give us a layout of the scene, the parking lot, the front desk, if you can see?
Yeah, so actually we came in and there's a building here, and then there's like this breezeway area where the office was, and then there was a building here. They kind of sat like this, and the car parked like this, and there was a white plastic chair right here, and Dad put me in the chair and then went into the office area.
Okay, could you see into the office area? Were you
no, because
looking
if
out
your
over
dad,
the parking lot?
Yeah, no, I just remember Dad put me in the chair, and across the street was a railroad track, and I kind of got lost in thinking. I remember thinking it'd be cool if a train went by, and so I was kind of thinking about that.
Okay.
So I didn't really. I mean, I looked at Dad, but you wouldn't get out of the chair and follow him if he told you to stay there.
Right. So you stood.
Right. So I never went in the office.
Okay.
I just knew it was an office. It was pretty clear it was an office.
Okay. So what's the next thing you remember?
This blonde lady comes out and talks to me, and it seems like she comes up from this side, and she's just asking me kind of if I'm Stan's kid or whatever, and we don't talk for very long at all, and then Dad comes up from the office, and he's angry at both of us, and he takes me kind of by the hand, and I remember just kind of tiptoeing quickly because, you know, I couldn't really touch the ground very much, and he walked me down the sidewalk there in front of the motel and opened a door, and he swatted my butt and just put me in the door and shut the door and left.
Okay, so you were left alone in
this room now.
In the hotel room.
Right.
Had it been occupied? What did you notice once you were inside?
So once I went in there, the room was pretty dark. I remember being really sunny outside, but the room was really dark, so I was just really scared. But it seemed like they'd been partying there. We had lots of parties at the house, so I could tell that people had been in there partying because there was like a bunch of bottles and stuff.
So you're familiar with
Yeah, and there was a bed, and I just remember looking at everything. There was like 2 nightstands, there was a bathroom in the back, and I just remember kind of assessing everything because I was kind of scared and I wasn't sure if somebody was in there with me.
So you were taking note of your surroundings.
Right, I always did.
Yeah. Okay. So how long do you think you were in the room before they
You
returned?
know, I bet it felt like to me an hour and a half, but I don't know, because, you know, you're a kid.
Right.
So I can't really know, but I do know that I was in there long enough to move away from the bed, because I remember the feeling of the bedspread, that scratchy, weird feeling. And I just remember at some point thinking the safest place would be for me to go up against the wall. And so I remember going up against the wall and just waiting for somebody to come back.
So you were still sort of positioned
with my back up against the wall. I remember thinking, just if I could get my back as tight against the wall as I could, it was the safest place for me.
Which means that you probably could see the entirety of the room.
Right. Like the door was right here, and like I sat like right kind of against the wall right there.
Okay.
Because when they come in, right, I'm pegged up against the door. I just remember that feeling of having that wall behind my back.
Yeah. Yeah. So you scooted up against the wall, and a short time later, who comes into the room?
Well, they all 3 do. Now Craig's with them, but I don't know that Craig's really there yet until they all come into the room.
You see him in the room.
Exactly. And they're kind of laughing and having fun, and Craig's kind of like carrying her in his arms, and I can tell they're just going to party. Like, I knew what partying was because I'd been around it my whole little life, and then I was kind of happy because I thought everything was going to be okay, because they kind of came in happy. And, you know, like then there was like music in the room, and they were like drinking. There was like this, there was like some area over here that had like all kinds of, you know, bottles and that kind of thing. So they were starting to party.
Right. And you mentioned earlier that you were familiar with Craig.
Oh, he was always around.
Right. So
yeah, it was just Dad's friend. He was always with us.
But to be clear, this is the first time you were introduced to this blonde woman.
Yes, I'd never met her before.
Okay.
I never knew my dad to be with another woman.
Okay.
Except my mom.
Okay. So do you remember any feelings at this point? You said you were feeling a little bit relieved that they were back and laughing and
right, that we were just going to party, because I can remember, you know, there were times lots in the house where you just stay down the hall and watch the adults party.
Right.
So I was just going to stay pegged up against the wall and watch.
Okay, you knew what to do.
Right, just be quiet.
Right. So what happens next? What's your next memory?
this lady comes over and sits down next to me, and she puts her feet back like this, and she was a little lady, and she had a skirt on, because I just remember her feet being over here, and she had a purse, and she sat down and put it on the ground, and she was really kind, and we just looked through her purse, and I don't remember anything that was in the purse, but I remember her purse, and I remember her opening it, and it was just sweet. I don't remember what she said to me. I just remember that I got to play in her purse, and then she got up and went back and partied, but left her purse with me.
Okay. So this could have gone on for a few hours, a few minutes. You probably don't have.
Yeah, I don't really remember. I don't remember until my dad's mad about something. And
okay, so the air in the room changes.
Yes, definitely. Dad's just kind of raging, and I honestly don't remember a ton other than him. Then all of a sudden he just starts attacking this lady, kind of.
Okay, and what's her reaction?
Well, what's weird is I don't really remember anything except that he takes his hand and he shoves her down on the bed and he holds her tight, and she's starting to scream now, and he's just got her pegged to the bed with his right hand, and with his left hand he pushes her skirt up and is getting her ready, to rape her. And I'd been raped by them, so I knew. I knew what was going on, right? I knew she was going to be raped, and that's the next thing I remember.
Okay. And you were probably scared by this point.
Well, I was terrified, because then anytime Dad got angry, somebody was getting hurt.
Right.
You know what I mean? And she was getting hurt, because I knew that kind of hurt. So I knew she was getting hurt.
Okay.
So sure, I was scared then, because it changed.
Right. And you mentioned that she was screaming.
She was.
And what do you remember thinking about that?
Not at that time, not much. I just watched in silence.
You were just probably immobilized with fear.
Right.
Okay. So after he rapes her, what happens next?
And I don't have a full roll of. It's just like a snapshot of him there. And then the next thing I remember is her scooting up on the bed. She's scooting backwards away from him, and she's absolutely screaming at him. And I just remember thinking that she's telling him, you're going to get in trouble for this. And I don't remember exactly what she said. I just knew that she was going to tell on him.
Right. And probably you don't talk to my father that way.
You don't. I knew she was going to be in trouble. Exactly. I knew, I didn't know what kind of trouble, but I'd never seen a woman scream like that. Like my mom screamed, but not in those days. And later in our life, my mom screamed a lot. When I was little, Mom didn't scream so much.
Okay.
Not like that. She did later in life, but not as much when I was little. Like that. I'd never seen a lady scream like her.
Okay. What is your next memory, your next snapshot of that?
Next, because Craig had been over here the whole time. Like I was over here on the wall, and Craig had been back here. It was really dark back there, like in front of the bathroom area, and there was a table here, and she was on the bed, and then the next thing, I just remember the next thing is he's behind her, and he's holding her arms here and here, and he's just holding her back, and she's facing my father.
So Craig is
and she's still screaming, right? But he's just holding her back, and Craig was 6'5", so he's a huge dude, and so I just remember in that room that was a kind of an awful sight, because he was just so huge and she was little, and holding her back like that. Then Dad just stepped up, and my father always wore a hunting knife in those days. I later learned he knifed people in parking lots and whatever. He was a hillbilly. He was from Tennessee. And he just slit her throat with that knife. And I didn't see a lot of blood. Her head actually went forward, and they just laid her down immediately. I remember, the next thing I remember is her feet coming out from the bed, and she didn't have any shoes or socks or anything on, and her feet, I just remember staring at her feet until, the next thing I remember, I just remember staring at her feet, because from where I was, that's the only thing you could see extending from the bed. I didn't see her anymore.
Okay. And so Craig had her under the arms and your father had grabbed her feet and they both placed her
Right.
down
Dad
next to
just
the bed.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And she probably didn't weigh that much. I mean, it was easy for him, I'm sure.
Right.
But I do remember her feet extending from the bed. Because they were bare feet, and that stayed with me for most of my life. Bare feet bothered the shit out of me my whole life. Right. But anyway, that's another thing.
Okay. So what happens next?
So the order of things now, I can't exactly be certain of, because memories come back. They don't play like a movie. Like, you just don't go back like a movie. Like, it's taken me my whole life to get there. So I can't be certain what happens next, but they're in the bathroom. I know they're in the bathroom, but I don't remember them carrying her there or anything like that. And then at some point in that room, my father comes to me and puts the knife in my right hand. And I remember it because it's super heavy. And then dang it. Second. He walks me in that bathroom, and they had her in the tub, and the water's going over her neck. And he makes me, I don't have to go in the bathroom, but he makes me stand at the door holding that knife, watching them. And then at some point after that, the front door is open, because I remember the front door being opened, and the car now is turned around, because we pulled in headlong, I remember, because I remember looking at the car when I was sitting in that chair. But when the door opened, the car had been turned around and the trunk was open.
Okay.
And so then I remember Dad coming back in, and they carried her out, but she had been wrapped in a bedspread, because I remember this bedspread thing going in the back of the car, and my dad took me out and opened the back door and told me to get in. And I can remember it was hard to get in because that car was tall for me.
You were that little.
Right. But I got in. But the thing that I hated was that she was in there, and I didn't know she was dead, because I didn't know what dead was. And so I was scared she was going to reach through, and I just remember being terrified that she was going to somehow get through that seat and grab me. And I was terrified she was going to grab me.
You remember viscerally feeling that?
Yes, that's all I remember, is that I don't know why I thought somehow she was going to get through that seat and get me.
Okay, so you begin to pull out. Who's driving?
Well, so Dad's driving, and Craig looks over at him. In fact, when I went and talked to Craig, I told him I remembered. He looked at Dad, and he just grabbed his face like that and said, "Stan, why did you do that?" And he was crying.
Craig was crying?
Craig was crying.
Okay.
And my dad didn't say anything. But I do remember Craig saying, "Stan, why did you do that?"
So you've pulled back onto
the highway.
14.
The highway's right in front of us, right? The highway's right there.
And what was the highway like? Was it heavily populated? Was there a lot of traffic, or was it pretty?
No, I don't. Empty? I remember the whole time I was sitting in that chair, no car went by.
You didn't see any cars?
No, I remember. Yeah, there was no cars, no trains.
Was this
I really wanted
a new
that train.
development, or was this a really old road?
Well, I learned later that road actually had only been there since '68, so it was a very relatively new highway. Okay. But I didn't know that then, of course. Right. But I learned that later, and we'll talk about that tomorrow.
Okay. So.
Yeah, so it was not a well-traveled road, and it didn't take you very many places, just up the gorge.
But you were familiar traveling on it.
Well, sure, because the next exit, I think it was the next exit back in those days, but I just remember seeing Lisa Road, because that road was the road that would take us home, and that was like only a mile from there.
Okay.
And my grandma lived there too. Later I learned my grandma actually worked at that hotel we went to, but we'll talk about that tomorrow too. But so when I remember sitting in the back of the car, when I saw Lisa Road and we passed Lisa Road, I knew we weren't going home.
Okay.
And I remember just kind of having a sinking feeling that we weren't going home.
Did you have an idea where you were headed, or do you not remember? Okay.
No, I really didn't.
So what's the next thing you do remember?
The next thing I remember is being up at our property. My parents had 40 acres that we didn't live on yet. They bought that property in '67, and they were building a house on it. And I did know our property because I knew we were sitting in front of the house. The house Well, the house later sat behind that. We were up, there's a field right beneath where the house was, and we were sitting up on the edge of where the field started. And the next thing I remember is Dad and Craig walking beside the car this way with that package.
And by package, you mean
That
woman wrapped
bedspread. Yeah, I remember seeing the bedspread go by, and I knew she was in there.
Did you know she was in there?
I knew she was in there.
Okay.
Right.
And so you see them walk alongside the car, and then
they went down the hill, but I didn't get up and out of the seat or anything. I just only saw them here, and I remember thinking I was glad I got to stay in the car, but that's all I remember of that.
So they disappear out of sight?
Right. And I don't stand up or anything. I just stand and
Okay.
I just stay sitting down.
Okay. So what happens next in your memory?
The next thing I remember is then being at my grandma's house back in town now, which is about, I guess it's 15 miles back to town. And we were at grandma's house, and she lived in a small house, but there was a spigot and the hose came straight out. And there was a mailbox right here, and Dad had the car here, and the trunk was open, and I just stood there and watched him. He was blowing the back of the car out.
Okay.
And so we were cleaning the car out.
Okay, and you were just remained in the back seat.
No, I was standing outside with him.
Oh, you were watching him.
Yeah, I was standing right next to him while we were blowing this out.
Okay. Do you remember seeing blood or?
You know, I don't really remember. I remember the water flowing out of the trunk though, and I remember it falling down into the gravel because there was a lot of water. Yeah,
okay.
But I don't really remember if there was blood.
And back then, was the trunk covered in carpet like they are today, or was it more raw metal? Do you not remember?
It was probably metal. Yeah, because
okay.
I kind of did. I mean, it seems like it was just metal in there.
Right. Okay, so you're at your grandmother's car, and to be clear, you're cleaning the car, which is her car, at her property.
Yes, exactly. I learned later that was Grandma's car, but I didn't know that then, of course.
Okay.
Maybe I did. I don't know. When the memory came back, I didn't remember that was her car.
Is Craig with you at this point?
No.
Okay.
It's just me and Dad.
Okay. Is he back at the property, or?
I assume.
Okay.
Yeah,
you don't have any.
I have no idea.
Memory of that. Okay. So what happens then?
Well, so I have this memory of me and Dad being back at our little house on Delaware Lane, and he's got this white package, which I actually know is the knife, and he goes in the very first bedroom, and there's this this hidden space that he moves, you know, like a tile over or something, and puts this knife up there. And later I told my mom that, and she said, I can't believe you know about that. Your dad hid everything up there, like records. He was a weirdo, but anything that was important to him, he put up there. And I remember him putting the knife up there.
It was probably an area, like a crawl space area.
Right. It was just like yes, exactly. Because it was like, it was in the first bedroom, closet.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So you have that memory, and then what is the next flash that you remember?
Then I don't actually remember anything else until it's late at night, and
so the sun's gone down at this
point. It's dark. It's so
Okay.
dark that I'm sitting in this. Now I'm in a gold car with black seats, and it's a 2-door. And the guys are working out in front of me because the headlights are on, and now we're in the bottom of the field though. We're not up above like we were when they first came
But
there.
you're aware of the fact that you're on the back
Yes,
on the property.
right. Yeah, I knew we were down the bottom of the field.
Okay.
Yeah, because we went up there as a family, you know, because that was our property, and we were building a house. And so I knew we were down because there was this really cool tree actually right by where they were working. Me and my brother used to climb that tree, and there was this limb, and we were so little that we'd sit up there for hours kind of on that limb.
So you were pretty familiar with
very familiar because the car was actually parked right at that tree, and they were working ahead, which is where Dad made that dump site.
And what do you mean by working? How did you understand it at that age?
Well, they had
What
shovels or something. Like they had tools.
Okay.
I remember them having tools.
You could see them.
Yeah, they're just
in
working.
view of the headlights.
Right.
Doing whatever.
Exactly.
But you remained in the car.
Yep.
Okay.
And I remember standing up in the back seat on this side watching them.
Okay. Okay. And so what happens in your memory?
Then the next thing I remember is being woke up. So obviously I had gone to sleep because I was frightened because when they were coming at me, I couldn't see if it was Dad or Craig. And I can remember saying, are you Dad or are you Craig? And it was Dad coming in, and he was dangling a necklace in my face.
Coming into the back seat?
Coming into the back seat.
Okay.
Yeah. My dad's a diabetic, and he would go in reactions often. And so I was used to him being in a reaction. He was acting like that, like goofy or drunk or something, like both. He was really being weird. He was dangling this thing in my face. And then if I was sitting here in the seats here, he put his head here and on his stomach, and then his feet went up like to the window here, and he put his hand, underneath me right here, which frightened me a little bit because I wasn't sure if he was going to touch me, but he didn't. He just kind of passed out and went to sleep. And then Craig's driving now, and the next thing I remember is looking at Craig, because Craig was a big man, and I could remember seeing the lights kind of in front of him, and I was just super happy that we were going home.
Like I couldn't see his silhouette.
Yeah, I could see his silhouette, right? Like I couldn't see above him because I was little, so I couldn't like see the road or anything. I just knew that we were going home finally.
And the clues of the scene would have led you to believe that this was kind of the end of the day. Your dad's passed out.
Right.
We must be headed back home finally.
Right. We had to be going
Yeah.
home. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it was late by now.
And do you remember arriving home?
I do, actually. I remember that whole ride I didn't go home because my legs hurt so bad by the time we got home that they didn't work, and they were like all prickly, and they just hurt super bad.
Because they'd probably fallen asleep from
right,
dad's
probably, right.
weight.
Yes, and so when I remember though, we came in, when we were pulling in, Mom was in the door, and the door was open, and she was waiting for us.
Okay. Do you remember feeling any way, or do you remember reaction from your mother?
The next thing I remember is Dad laying on the couch, and I'm standing there, and my mom's hysterical because it's her stand, and she's hysterical. And
is your dad unconscious on the couch?
He's unconscious.
Okay.
Yeah, they cannot wake him up.
So how does he get from the car to the couch?
I'm assuming Craig carried him.
Okay.
I don't really remember, and and it seems to me like Craig might have carried me in too, because I just remember standing. I just remember now we're all in the living room. But I don't really remember walking in there, because I remember being in the living room thinking my legs didn't work, and I wasn't sure how to get down the hall, because I really just wanted to get down the hall.
And what was down the hall?
My room. But I really wanted my mom to look at me. I remember that greatly, and she never did.
And asked, where have you been? Are you okay?
No, and so that's kind of all I remember then is I think that I scooted down the hall, quite honestly. It took me a long time to get through that kind of I don't really exactly remember, but I remember thinking that my legs, I couldn't get down there, and I just wanted to get away from everybody.
Right. But you don't have any memory of getting back to your bedroom? Or
I really don't. I remember being in my room, though.
Okay.
I do remember being in my room because I'm terrified, and I remember pegging myself up against the wall. And the house is really quiet because then Dad has to go to the hospital where he is admitted for 7 days because he damn near killed himself through all that day, being a diabetic. And then I just remember my mom coming in sometime much later, and she's angry with me. And I can't answer her questions because I don't know them. And I remember her hitting me in the head and just telling me to go to sleep. And I remember I was awake most of the night, but when the morning came, I can remember going to sleep. I was thankful that the morning came.
So when the sun came up, you finally were
Right.
able to...
Right. And that's the whole day.
What an experience. Oh, Mom.
Yes. Okay. Whew, sorry. Dang it.
Don't apologize. This has been incredibly...
And that was how the day played out.
Okay. So the last memory, you're falling asleep. The sun is
Right.
coming out.
Right.
And later on, you learned that your father had been admitted to the hospital.
I don't really remember that, but I wouldn't have liked him gone because Dad, even though he was a horrible, horrible man, he was my only source of comfort. And so I knew he was gone because there was nobody to go to.
And even though he was a perpetrator, he was your protector in some ways, which...
Right. So I remember I always wanted my dad to come home because, right, he gave me my nightmares, but he also comforted my nightmares.
Right. You mentioned that the events of that day led to him becoming unconscious. And
Right.
ultimately leading to what is referred to as a diabetic coma.
Right.
Can you tell us a little bit about what causes those?
Well, stress in a diabetic, and we can go into that more in the next episode, but having not eating, and I remember my father drinking beer that day too when we were up at the property. I remember beer being there. Not eating and all that. Never a time in his life was he ever admitted to the hospital for a diabetic coma where he stayed. And that time he stayed for 7 days. And when I got the hospital records, which we'll talk about again, those hospital records had him admitted, as I said, late at night, 12:55 a.m., and he was foaming at the mouth. He almost killed himself that day.
Wow. Okay. So speaking of records, documents, you have acquired and built up quite a lot of supporting evidence.
Right.
That lays out exactly the
The
events
day
of
of the
this
murder.
day.
Right.
And we, like you mentioned, we will get into those in the coming episodes. Is there anything that you feel like you missed out that you want to add?
I don't think so.
And how do you want to set up the next episode?
I need help, and what I am trying to do through this is there are trained people who understand these kinds of rooms. I've been in therapy obviously for 25 years of my life or better, and so what I hope to do in the next episode is anybody viewing this, anybody watching that can put some of these things together, I'll give all the facts that I have. It took me some time. When I went to my family, my mom said if I got the hospital records, I'd have the day of the murder, and I did get those hospital records, and that's a story in and of itself. And with those, that gave me the date of the murder, and I entered that. But it took me some time, a couple of years then, to find the missing person because I was looking in the wrong place. And so in our next episode, I'd like to go over all of those facts and have anybody who's listening and can offer some supporting help. And then I'll go into the other victim the other guy who was in the room with us, Craig. He's still alive, and I went and talked to him, and I have a recording because my husband and I went up there and we recorded him, and I want to play some of that as well, where he tells me to let it go, and I don't want to let it go, so that's why I'm here. I need help.
Okay. And any links, Jodie's blog, various ways to reach out and contact her, we'll list in the bio below, so that can be accessed there. Is there anything else you?
No, that's enough for today. I'm done.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'm taxed.
Sharing your story.
Yep.
Being so brave.
Yes, thank you for listening.
Thank you.